Thank you all for being here today. My name is Hannah, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to today's session, which is brought to you by Youth and Environment Europe, or YEE, which we are also, or usually known by, and is supported by the European Youth Foundation. So, in today's conversation, we will talk about mental health from the perspective of young climate activists. We have the pleasure of having two young climate activists with us today that have a particular experience in this area. And they will get a chance to introduce themselves shortly, and you will hear more about their stories. To lead this conversation, we have Juni Sinkkonen, who is a psychologist and an eco-emotion expert. She has previously done research on young climate activists and their identities, and she's recently started her PhD to further explore how the field of psychology and societal transformation are interrelated. And I just want to mention that there will be a Q&A after the conversation. So if you have any questions that arise during the conversation of our speakers, please put them in the chat, which we will be looking at, and then we will get back to them later. So with that being said, I want to give the floor to Juni to start the conversation and to introduce today's speakers. And I'm very much looking forward to your conversation.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And also, warm welcome to everybody on my behalf. And wonderful to have you here, Natalie and Pim. Would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe Pim could start.
Hi everyone, my name is Pim. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a climate activist based in London. So I'm a facilitator and youth speaker at Force of Nature. I'm also on the youth board for the Resilience Project, and I also work with UK Youth Climate Coalition, which is funnily enough a member of Youth and Environment Europe. So it's nice to have two worlds collide today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am coming to you from Washington, D.C. Um, I'm a student and activist here. I started, though, in California. I'm on the Gen Z board for Climate Mental Health Network, and I started my work with grassroots local organizing in the Bay Area.
Great. Thank you so much. Would you like to shortly share what is your personal journey to activism? Maybe now, Natalie, you can continue.
I started when I was about 12, and my first love, I think, was being in the ocean and snorkeling and diving. That's kind of where I fell in love, was with coral. And then I started to see the decline in the reefs of my local diving area. And then I brought it back to home in California, and I knew I needed to start somewhere and get involved locally. So that's where it started, and it went throughout high school. I was working with grassroots local organizations, working on mainly education based, um, using the model by youth for youth. So we were entirely educating other youth around us. And then I got into the mental health sector of climate activism, and that's where I am now.
That's awesome. Thanks. How about Pim?
Um, so I think as a kid I was always very interested in the environment. I was lucky enough to grow up half of my time in Southeast Asia and then the other half when I moved to England. And I really noticed the difference in people's attitude with the environment. So I was really interested in like why that was and just asking those questions. But I didn't really have any kind of formal kind of experience with activism until I was about 15 or 16 when I organized a student climate conference across my whole regional area. to kind of just discuss all these issues and what we can do as students. And then from there, I joined a local grassroots group of young people as well, who, were organizing events, and we were also doing climate education projects. And then from there, I got in touch. Well, Force of Nature got in touch with us, because we had a good amount of young people. And then kind of that just brought me to where I am now. So that was, yeah, I'm now 20. That was like 5, 6 years ago. Yeah.
So wonderful to hear your stories. You have really started super early, super young. I really admire that. Myself, I started around maybe in my 20s. So yeah, you have really started early. If we dive a bit deeper to the meaning of activism and the definition of activism, would you like to share what activism means for you? Pim, maybe can you continue?
I think when anyone asks about the kind of what they associate with the word activist, I think they tend to think of someone who is protesting on the streets, which is activism. It's totally activism, but it's not the only part of activism that people can do. So I think my definition of it, which is something that one of my peers told me, was being an activist is just being an active citizen. So anyone who is just engaged with their surroundings, engaged with supporting people, whether it's you're the person like on the global stage, or whether it's the person that drove them there. Um, so yeah, I think the most simple way to explain it is just an active citizen. It can be anyone, and you can be doing anything. It doesn't have to be the most kind of front-facing roles, because there are literally everyone can be mobilized. So I think that's what an activist means to me.
Thanks. How about Natalie? What do you think?
I want to say that's beautiful what you said, Pam. Um, I think I was also thinking about the definition of activism, and my definition, I think, is really just leading with what you know and think is right. Similarly to what she said, but I think it doesn't have to be this all-encompassing perfect world where I'm just an activist, because there's so many other parts of my life. I am an activist in one section and I love doing it, but it's also like connecting with other activists to make this like larger coalition of mobilizing youth, but also just like being on the same page of like climate change is here kind of thing. So different meanings, I guess, of activism, but I think the main one that encompasses law is just following what you know is right, and doing what you can to try to help that.
Wow, thank you so much, both. Yeah, really, really interesting thoughts and beautiful thoughts. And I myself, I have research on activism a bit, and it was quite interesting to see how different young climate activists in Finland identified themselves as activists, and what kind of also different activist categories came up in the research. And sometimes I've even heard this definition of activism, that in a sense, all of us, we are activists because we are agents in the world. We're always changing the world, no matter what we do. Unconsciously or consciously, we're always changing the world. So in that sense, maybe, and also as activist and activism as words and as concepts, they have quite a lot of tension in them. And in my research also, I noticed that some people were thinking, even though they were doing quite a lot of what we would consider activism, they thought, oh no, I'm not, I cannot take this label on myself, either for fear that they would be, mocked by others, or they just thought they are not enough, they're not doing enough. But maybe, I don't know, maybe I can just put this question out there, and just for all of us to think, like, how could we encourage people to really use their agency for good, and not necessarily even use the word activist, or maybe define activism in a way that more people could really feel that they are truly doing a change in the world. But yeah, what do you think about this? That as youth, as young activists, do you think there are some specific issues, in your opinion, that arise in being activist as a young person versus maybe belonging to an older age group? Either one of you can start, however you feel like.
I know for me, something that has really come up within like the last few weeks is I'm a full-time student and also an activist, and I love being both, and both are really big part of my identities, but it's not easy. It's like straight from this, I have a test in one of my classes, so it's not always, and I know people say that a lot, and I used to be that person where it's like, oh, it's not actually that hard to balance it. But as I do more activism work and I get more involved in DC, it detracts from being a student, and I constantly have to find ways around my classes. And also, I just want to put out that like university is not meant for you to like be an activist and go to class, because there's so many strict rules, at least at my university, of like attending, and there's not a lot of leeway to do both, which is hard at this moment in time for me. As a young person and an activist.
Please do continue, Pim.
Yeah, I completely get what Natalie is saying. As a student as well, I'm going into my last year of uni. It's like difficult, balancing the two lives. But I think a couple of issues come up, just as that young people experience. Um, but I just want to like silver line it with like there are issues, but there are also so many rewarding things about it. But one of the things that came up is literally we were just when you mentioned like, oh, we started when we were really young. When you said that, in my mind, this thing suddenly came up of like so many young activists I know, we've had to grow up really quick because we've had to be surrounded by so many issues, and a lot of the time surrounded by people who are a lot older than us. And sometimes as a young person, you can feel really small, when you're the only young person in the room and you're surrounded by all these older people who seem so knowledgeable. And you're like, what can I even do? I'm just a young person who's lived half their life. And so several things of like having to grow up quick and be serious quick. And I feel like a lot of us, yeah, have to feel like we have to be quite serious. And then imposter syndrome comes with that, whether we feel enough for the movement, whether we feel like we're doing enough, whether we're experienced enough. Um, and also kind of just, we're still young. We're trying to find who we are at the same time as trying to be part of a collective movement. So it brings a lot of kind of tensions within that. But I think what's great about it is while we're trying to find out who we are, we're also like not burdened by what I find a lot of older people have is they kind of through just general life experience might end up being burdened by oppressive ideologies that you just learn over a lifetime that you're being told. Whereas as young people, like we haven't lived enough to be told all of that yet. So, we're trying to find out ourselves, but we're also trying to find out how we want the world to be. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's so many things, and like balancing that all, and also doing it in a realistic and sustainable way where we're compensated for our time, or where our worth is really seen, is also a struggle. But yeah, not to make it seem like there are so many issues. There are a lot of rewards as well.
Thank you so much for your answers, and I really do recognize this that of course this will in an ideal world we wouldn't need activism, and young people should be free to be young and just to explore themselves without this burden of trying to change the society for better and trying to change the world for better. That is really the job of adults and decision makers, and that should be their responsibility, but it seems it is really neglected by them. So, but then again, like you said, it is quite amazing that young people are also using their agency. They're really um, empowering themselves and others, creating collectives that really have a world-changing power. It's in itself, it's revolutionary. It is beautiful, and yeah, um, I think it's really powerful. And yeah, but maybe if we move towards mental health, um, would you say that eco crisis has somehow affected you personally, your mental health? Who would like to start?
I can start. Um, I mean, it 100% has affected my mental health. I was just on an intergenerational call, and one person was asking me, and she said, like, is there ever a day you don't think about it? And I like took a step back, and I was like, no, I guess there's really not a day that I don't ever think about it. And it could be in the smallest ways. And so then I started to name things. It's like every day I use a reusable water bottle. That's just like ingrained in me, but I guess in a way that's me thinking about the climate crisis, or like how yesterday I went to the dining hall at my university and I bring my own utensils because they only have plastic there. So it's like things like that where I'm not meaning to think about it, but it's just practices that I've put into my daily life that make me think about it. Um, and then I have like this whole mental health journey with climate anxiety, but also happy climate emotions, and trying to balance those. And it's not always easy, but it definitely has affected me in various ways.
Um, yeah, I think very, very similarly to Natalie, like, of course, yeah, very, very affected by kind of general eco emotions. And I think that even though maybe, I think same, like I consciously think about it as well, all the time. But sometimes even when I try and rest my mind, it's still in the back of the head. And I think, especially with sometimes how busy we can get with life, like student lives, personal lives, um, lives for, climate justice, it's difficult to kind of rest your body. And I've definitely felt at times this kind of chronic stress where it kind of just builds up in different tensions in your body. And you might not be consciously thinking you're stressed, but your body is feeling it. Um, And yeah, I think, yeah, it definitely has affected. Um, but again, like Natalie said, it's the balance of like, it's affected my mental health um, in some ways, which may be seen as uncomfortable, but in other ways, in an amazing way, like doing things that I never thought I would have before, remaining curious about like the light world, just being constantly curious because knowing that like everything we see isn't just the base, it's one answer isn't just the base answer. There's always something underneath, which is what we as activists try and look at as well. So yeah, I think good and bad ways.
Thank you so much for sharing. How do you cope with these? You were already talking about eco emotions, and how would you, in your personal life, how do you cope with these eco crisis related emotions such as grief, anger, anxiety? Feel
I
free to
think
start. Thanks.
I think um to me there's kind of like a few different ways eco anxiety kind of manifests into me, and I know for so many of my peers that I talk to as well is like sometimes it's like real anxiety of like you get an anxiety attack or you feel it in your body, and then sometimes it's just like this lingering stress and constant like worry. And I think for the times that it's like it's in my body and it gets so overwhelming, I physically have to take a break from the work that I do or whatever I'm doing at that moment related to activism. And I physically have to, this sounds so corny, but I like have to go outside and like see trees or like see real nature. I also live in a city, which makes it like a little harder, because there's just so many buildings and concrete around. But I like have to go to a park or some sort of green area to like remember that like it's not all on me first off, and like there's so many other moving parts to this, but also it's like look at this amazing tree that I love to look at and it's giving me all this life and air. And the second part that I found is I talk to all my climate activism friends, because I know I'm not alone, but it's so hard in that moment when you feel like you're the only one feeling it. So texting or calling a friend is like so helpful for me. And then sometimes we'll talk about like eco anxiety, and then sometimes we'll just talk about our life, and that helps it to not be less isolating.
um I think Natalie hit the nail on the head, to be honest. So I like very similar ways of coping, like connecting with community again and like finding safe people to talk to has been life-changing, I think. But also understanding kind of what I need in that moment. Each of us have different needs in different moments. It might be like a social need, it might be a physical need, like physical exhaustion, social exhaustion, it could be spiritual exhaustion. Like there's so many types, and understanding but like what kind of exhaustion that is as a result of eco anxiety has been really useful. Um, and I just want to say, like, bed rotting is okay too. Like I have done that, and I will continue to do that when I need to, because sometimes like my body just can't do anything else other than just lie in bed. And that's okay. And if that's what I need to cope, then that's okay too. But it's like learning to balance that, obviously. Everything in moderation. I can't just lie in bed all the time. That's not good for me either. I've found that out. I trust you. Like, um, so yeah, having a mix of like having community to go to. Um, and I think after a while now, like I used to think that coping with eco anxiety and grief and anger I used to think that grief and anger were bad things. But I think after a while, like learning to accept them as they are and knowing that I don't have to do anything with that grief or anger. I used to think that with eco-anxiety, I used to have to then immediately go and distract myself by doing something else and doing an action or whatever. But like Natalie said, sometimes just like doing something else and knowing that you don't have to be the one to do that um is good too. Like putting some things on the side is really useful as well. I think kind of going through that accepting of the grief and anger and like letting it come and knowing that those are completely rational emotions in the face of the whole crisis that we're experiencing. Knowing that it's rational just makes me kind of like empathize with myself a little bit more um and not be angry that I'm kind of heading into that realm of burnout and things. So yeah.
Thank you both. So such really wise words. I really like how you bring different aspects of coping with the eco emotions, like resting, connecting with the collective, connecting with community. Also, our more than human community. Like you, Natalie, talked about going to meet some trees, going to see some trees, like reminding ourselves what we actually fight for. Like there's so much beauty, miracles in this world still present. So really just reminding ourselves of those wonders in the world. And yeah, and really these turbulent times require us to also invent these new ways of building communities, building collective movements, doing activism and transforming the world. And I think this is one of the really good sides of activism, even though we do it for necessity and even as being forced to do it. But these are the really good sides, creating new communities, creating more sustainable ways of processing emotions as well. And now we get to talking about this sustainable action and also burnout. As we know, there's no avoiding contradictions when one is an activist, whether it be difficult emotions, social conflicts, or resistance from society. So yeah, let's dive deeper into how to navigate the tensions that arise from doing activism. Can you both maybe name one problem or barrier that you have encountered as a young activist and how you have solved the problem or overrun the barrier? Please feel free to start, either one.
I can start. Um, so I'll just think of kind of is it okay if I slightly separate my answers to the questions? Um, so I think one barrier that I encountered, one issue that I encountered as an activist um was that because of being the only young person in the space a lot of the time, there was obviously imposter syndrome that came in, which is when you feel like you're not experienced enough or you're not good enough or all of this kind of narratives telling you that. And I had it for a long time, um, and just kept doing things because I wanted to keep doing good. Um, but I eventually learned that with imposter syndrome, like it wasn't really necessary in my thoughts. Um, I learned that after like speaking and having more and more intergenerational conversations, it made me just realize like, oh yeah, we are all human, which I should know, but sometimes we don't think about it enough. Um, but even the people with a lot more experience than me, like they're having their own doubts as well in life and all of this. And also that as a young person and as just someone in my own life, we all have very, very unique experiences to each other. And the stories that come out of that are also unique, and what we learn is unique. And so we're always bringing something to the table, even though we might not necessarily like think that in the first place. Um, so yeah, I think that was one issue. Um, yeah, obviously it still creeps in sometimes, but mostly it's okay now.
I think an issue that is talked about a lot, and in some ways I disagree with it, but I do agree with that when you're super young. So like both of us started in high school, and like when I was in middle school, I realized that this was a problem and I wanted to get involved, and I didn't have agency and I relied a lot on my parents, and I was so grateful that I have such supportive parents who wanted to support my passions. But if I didn't have that, I really wouldn't be in the position I am, because I started young, and I that was because they could drive me to places or they would help me look up things and stuff like that. And um I would I would be delayed. Not delayed, that's a terrible word, I think, in this situation. But I wouldn't be where I am if they didn't help me when I was so young. And then in high school, I got more agency. I could take the bus places and stuff like that. And now that I'm in college, I really don't, I can do things on my own a lot. But when I was super young and in middle school, I couldn't really go places alone, at least where I was. So um, that was something that was true in my case, which I know it is for many others as well.
Really important that you bring up this intergenerational support as well. I think it's highly important because after all, we all have to work together, and I think we can all learn from each other. And I think many older people would have so much to learn from youth concerning these things and activism. Um, how about have you ever encountered activist burnout during your time as an activist, either yourselves or somebody you know, maybe? Yeah. Maybe Natalie, would you like to continue?
Yeah. Um, it's funny to think that I'm so young and that I have had climate burnout before, because I'm only 19 and I really only like I mainly started in high school, which is like 14, 15. But I had burnout kind of like at the end of my last year of high school. So what age was I? I was like 17. Um, and from the last few months of high school through the whole summer, and I had to separate myself. I didn't touch anything activism related. I mean, obviously, like I love going on hikes and stuff like that, but I mean, I wasn't like doing the work that I had been doing in high school of um the grassroots organizing I was doing. And I was so burnt out from the 4 years of just constant work, work, work. I now realized a lot of things that I can't do again. So like a few of those, which is just like burnout in general, is like I would so I would often put the work I was doing, excuse me, the work I was doing before my like life, if that makes sense. So I would schedule meetings and it was just constant work, and I had no time to just like be myself or go to family dinners or hang out with my friends, because it was like one more email, one more text, another call. It was like constant go, 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 on top of also being a high school student applying to universities. So that was when I encountered burnout. Um, and to avoid it, I know a bunch of things that I'm like actively put into my life on purpose, which is like I don't work all the time, and that it's okay to like wait 24 hours to send an email so that I could go hang out with my friends. And so I've really prioritized the the art of like not being in this hustle culture, which I know in America is like so go, go, go. I don't know how it is in other places of the world, but that's what I've been really prioritizing for myself, to not be burnt out again.
Yeah, I relate to so much of that. Definitely have sent those like 2, 3 a.m. emails at the age of like 16. And now thinking back, it's like, what was I doing? Like sending an email at that time of day, that's insane. Um, but yeah, similarly, I think around the same time, I'm just thinking of one instance of when I was in high school as well, or like A levels are equivalent. And yeah, I was organizing that conference, and I was meant to be doing it with someone else, but after a while realized that I couldn't really rely on them. And so I was the only person in the whole school organizing this thing. And it kind of came to a point where I literally just broke down in front of one of my teachers. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Like, I don't have any support. Like, I'm so tired and all of this. And I actually didn't I that was burnout in terms of like a couple days of experiencing it because I didn't really have any other choice. But luckily, like I brought together a group of students who were really passionate about the project. And honestly, like I couldn't have done it if it weren't for them, just bringing that group together. Um, and yeah, but I think since learning things from Force of Nature about eco psychology and really changing my perspective on it, I haven't experienced the levels of burnout which make me want to drop things for long periods of time. I find that like obviously I still experience burnout now, but I think it's for like a good like me giving myself maybe max like a month. And then after a month, I start to feel a little bit more like refreshed and renewed. And I feel like I can actually get back into it again. Um, but I would say I don't necessarily avoid burnout. Um, I just have methods of like managing how bad it will be. Because at the end of the day, my kind of thinking of it is I can't stop burnout from happening. I think like naturally anything you work hard in, we are going to feel burnout at one point. You know, you get like roller coasters of things being really intense at times of year and then things being calming down a lot. Um, so my kind of point of view of it is just managing it and kind of protecting it before it gets worse. So similarly with Natalie, kind of just having boundaries of work and things and having boundaries before it actually gets too overwhelming. So now like I'll only have certain times of day where I'll do work. Like if it gets past 10 p.m., I'm not maybe 11. I'm not gonna be like I'll be like, no, I'm dropping it, I'm not gonna do it. Um, or just giving myself more time to breathe. Like now at the weekends, I'm like, no, that is my weekend. I'm having that time to rest, or, really letting myself kind of step back from things and really communicating with people as well. I'm lucky enough to be working a lot of the time with a group of people. So just letting them know my capacity and my well-being at that moment, being like, hey, this week my capacity is only around a 5. So, can you like keep a check of that? Like if I say I'm up to doing things, which I often am, and I'll be like, yeah, I'll do this, yeah, I'll do that. They'll be like, hey, you said you were only at this. Um, so yeah, I think it's just for me anyway, personally, accepting it when it comes, but having those kind of like protective layers, ensuring it's not going to be like absolutely awful and just letting it come over me. And when it comes, it will come. And it went giving myself enough time to kind of accept it, manage it, and then let it pass over and then move on. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing both. And yeah, it makes me really sad to hear that you have both experienced this really difficult, having these really difficult experiences a really young age, and so many others as well are having burnouts, like young people, for several reasons. And I guess our whole world is in a burnout at the moment, like literally as well. So we truly can feel it also in our small mind bodies. And just to think, if this planet is our bigger mind body or body, then we kind of somehow reflect its state in ourselves in a way, if we think from eco-psychological point of view. But if we go to and thank you so much for sharing also your tools how to bounce back from the burnout, or how to resist burnout, and you mentioned the power of collective, and really building this collective to and being able to trust that others continue the work while we are resting, and really communicating our needs to others so that they know where we are at. That's really, really important. I do agree with that. But if we go to this idea of regenerative action, this means that we can, regenerative action means that we can sustain this impactful action for a longer period of time without compromising our well-being. What are your thoughts on this regenerative activism culture and how to promote it? Either one of you can start.
I think sometimes, or a lot of times in this space, it's always like, it's a fight, it's a time crunch, we have to be aggressive to meet this goal by this year. And it's all these like super fast-paced things, which is not wrong, but then at the same time, you can only be sprinting for so long. You have to take breaks, and you have to like go on a slow walk or a fast walk, or just not be sprinting. Another thing that I think about all the time is, not all the time, that I've been thinking about recently, I guess, is that we're fighting for a better future, but that future is hopefully for a long time. So it's like we're not just fighting so that the next 100 years are amazing, but we're fighting for, I mean, indefinitely that it's amazing, meaning that you can't be going 110% every single day for the rest of your lifetime, because that's just impossible. So I think we really need to promote regenerative action, because I mean, in my head, that's kind of the only way that this whole fight or this whole journey will be able to sustain multiple generations, and really just be a constant slate of just the earth is in good condition right now. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that, Natalie. Thank you for like putting that note about like, yeah, we want it more than longer than 100 years. That's so true. Um, I think so. I think I'm not sure whether you said the definition, but it was like regenerative action means that we can sustain impactful action for a longer period of time without compromising our well-being, right? Um, and I think, this kind of goes back to one of the first few questions about what is an activist. I think a lot of the time at the moment, there's this view of being an activist means you have to be 100% perfect. You have to, not a single day have one slight hypocrisy. If you carry a plastic water bottle, then like you're over. You're not an activist anymore. Like that's that's kind of intense. And realistically, we're living in a world that is built around these unjust systems that created the climate crisis. and realistically, we're living within those at the moment. We're doing what we can while we're in those. And something that Clover Hogan says a lot is that um, we need 100 imperfect activists, not one perfect one, which is so true. And I think part of that kind of regenerative action is accepting that we don't have to be perfect. And I think that notion of being perfect feels very kind of like hustle culture, capitalistic, always striving for more and that consumption of perfection. Um, when in the natural world, not even everything is perfect. I don't think anything is perfect in the natural world. So how would we be perfect when we are also within that natural world? Um, so I think, yeah, it's like understanding that, and also realizing that I think a lot of kind of regenerative action isn't new. Um, there's been so many different communities around the world historically who have been doing this for years. And I think one comes to mind. There was a group of women in the 1970s in the women's liberation movement that formed these kind of informal childcare groups and looked after each other's children, which meant that some women, like while they swapped around, they had free time to then actually contribute to society and contribute to these kind of like political movements. And that wouldn't have happened without this kind of like collective culture of care, which is really, really important for kind of sustaining us and sustaining our activism and sustaining the movement. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your beautiful words, both. We're coming to the part that there are some questions from the audience, maybe. But before that, I would really like to hear from you. What would be your final words of encouragement to all the youth out there wanting to make the world a better place?
Um, I think some of my thoughts are like you can do this and you got this and you are not like there is no small action and so many people are like your one thing won't make a difference, but like if it makes you happy to know that you're doing that, then you should do it. And that you are welcome in this space because sometimes it's quite daunting to be like, well, this person has done this, this, and this, and I haven't done any of that. And that does not mean that you are not as just as amazing activist as people who are doing like 100 million things. Um, and that you are welcome in this space.
Um, I would say that you know, again, I mentioned that we feel like we have to be so serious and so like put together all the time. But I think my message would be that just be gentle with yourself. That something that I need to tell myself a lot too is to remind yourself you are a good person and everything you do is going to, you know, strive for that. And as long as you're gentle with yourself, then everything you do is going to kind of like treat you well as well. Something that I like to tell myself is like, well, I would be gentle to nature, like I would be gentle to Mother Nature, so therefore I should be gentle to myself as well. Because yeah, I wouldn't tell a leaf or a tree that it's not growing fast enough. Like that's crazy. So why would I tell myself that? Um, so yeah, just a reminder, like stay grounded and be gentle because it's tough, but even a tree grows in the most harsh conditions. So
Thank you so much. Such empowering words. And yeah, I would also like to add that uh, I think in its core for me, activism is about celebrating this miraculous diversity of life on this unique planet, um, in the space, floating in the space, vast space. And yeah, for us all working for a better world, finding spaces and time together to really also celebrate this beautiful life that we share together with other species, um, on this earth. Yeah, finding also joy, cultivating gratitude. Yeah, those kinds of things. Thank you so much for the amazing, amazing conversation. You brought me so much inspiration, and I also believe to all the listeners as well. And now maybe if Hannah wants to join in and ask some audience questions, maybe.
Thank you, Juni, and thank you to Natalie and Pim for some amazingly inspirational comments and reflections. I think, yeah, at least me, I've been very, very inspired by what you've said. You've also touched on a lot of things that youth environment works with every day, youth activism, and how to navigate this. But like you said, we do have some questions from the audience. Both before this conversation, we received some questions and also during. So people are definitely very interested in the topics that you've been talking about. So the first question that we have gotten is, does eco-anxiety affect some more than others? And does talking about it help overcome it? And I think this is a pretty general question that I would just ask to all of you, and also Juni, if you have some reflections as well, feel free to chip in on this as well. So does eco-anxiety affect some more than others, and does talking about it help overcome it? And I'll leave the word to anyone that wants to take it.
Well, maybe I can say from my experience as a psychologist and eco-emotion expert, um, yeah, it definitely affects others a bit more. Maybe some people are more sensitive to what is happening in the world, maybe more tuned in what is happening in the world to our common home. But yeah, people feel it on different levels for different reasons. So yeah, we're all different. But I would really love to hear from Natalie and Pim. What do you think about these questions?
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Pim.
Juni. And Tim, I see you have something to say, so please go ahead.
Yeah, that question actually addresses one of the big things about, I think, the term eco-anxiety in itself, which has, in some spaces, caused kind of a lot of discussion around the meaning of it, because some people attribute the word eco-anxiety to a feeling of hopelessness in the face of the climate crisis, and often they associate that with this kind of like looming vision of the climate crisis in the future, and highlighting the words the future. But we know that people in the global south are experiencing the climate crisis as they are now, um, and their lives are being affected by it every day. So I think accepting kind of the wider term of like eco emotions and eco psychology, where people in the global north experience the environment and climate crisis very differently to people in the global south, um, and how they interact with it in their lives are incredibly different, because they're already experiencing it there. They're already experiencing loss. They're already experiencing like this immense grief. Um, so not that we're not being affected by it in the global north, but obviously it's disproportionate, the effect. So yeah, I think that raises a really important note about eco anxiety and eco psychology.
No, but thank you so much for highlighting that, Kim, and thank you for that comment because, yeah, I think it's very true that we also really need to highlight how people in countries that are experiencing climate change more than we are in the global north are actually experiencing this and the emotions related to this. So I think that is a very, very important topic that unfortunately is a bit under researched at the moment. So it's very, very important to draw attention to this divide and also realize that we are speaking about this from the perspective of the global north. So thank you so much for that comment, Pim. Do you also have something you want to say about this, Natalie? Does eco-anxiety affect some more than others, and does talking about it help overcome it?
Yeah, I think to amplify and reflect a little bit. So, um, I mean, it's a fact that the countries that are emitting the most will also are not seeing the direct effects currently, and people in the global north are facing climate change and seeing it now, but also we know that climate or nations in the global south and island nations are going to experience it far much worse than people in the global north. And then also kind of like any emotion, I mean, for me at least, it's nice to identify it and then be able to like sit with it and then talk about it. And I think that in general, those like steps of being like, oh, this is what I'm feeling. Let me like feel it and not just push it down and then figure out ways around it is helpful for me. And also, I mean, kind of like any emotion as well, people will feel it in different ways. I think that's just how we kind of work sometimes, is like in any emotion. So those are my thoughts.
Yes, thank you both. Really, really amazing things that you brought up. And I would like to also add to the talking about emotions and definitely naming, recognizing and naming the emotions help. And this is part of the processing the emotions. And according to researcher Panu Pihkala's process model, we need the emotional engagement. We need to really address the emotions, and then again we need some action. We need also self-care, which can also include distancing. It's healthy distancing at times. So yeah, all of these different components help us to cope in this radically changing world.
No, thank you, Uni, for that comment. And also in YE's resource pack, we have gathered quite a few resources that are useful for people that are interested in eco-anxiety and eco-emotions. We have also included this process model that Uni is talking about, so you can check it out there as well. It's a model for how to actually process these emotions and what process is like. So thank you for that, Juni. We have some more questions from the audience. So the next one is, how do you deal with feelings of outrage, anger, disbelief when it comes from your loved ones, especially friends and family members? So how to deal with negative emotions from your loved ones. And I'll leave the floor open again to anyone that wants to start answering this question.
I don't have an answer. I think it's very hard. It's super hard not having the support from people that you love, or who mean a lot to you? I don't have an answer. I just want to note that it's a hard situation and that many people feel it, but it doesn't make it any harder or less hard knowing that other people also feel that way.
Thank you, Natalie. No, it's definitely a very difficult issue to address. And it's not so easy to know exactly how to go about it. Is there anyone else that has any specific experiences with this or um, thoughts on how to handle it? And I saw you raising your hand, Pim, so I will leave the word to you.
Um, I would say that I think I'm lucky enough now to not have that so much because I have kind of cultivated who I keep around me. But I definitely can relate to that in the level that my mum initially, when I first started this, was kind of like questioning, like, why are you doing this? Like, it's taking all your time out. Um, Kind of didn't really understand, was just like, oh, this is silly, all of this. And it made me feel really disempowered. Um, but I think it depends on the other person, but I think if there's a way, especially with family, because like at the end of the day, like you love them, hopefully. Um, it's finding a way to understand them and their perspective and kind of humanize with them and understand them on their level. So with my mum, I kind of understood her point of view from it because she, you know, she's Thai. She came to England like to have a better life and seeing me go through all these hardships, she's like, why did I do this? Um, but then, and she also didn't really understand the climate effects. But I kind of framed it in a way that she would understand, relating it to Thailand, relating it to, oh, you're seeing these floods happen in Thailand. Like that is because of the climate crisis and also understanding that the feelings she has in response to it is because of the narratives she's been told to her about the climate crisis or about questioning kind of society or all these things. It's, I think, trying to find that middle ground where you can understand where they come from. And you don't necessarily, I think, you don't always need to convince them. You just need to let them under under like accept that that's what you're doing. And you might not ever change them, and that's fine because that's what narratives do to us. Sometimes some narratives stick, but I think it's kind of just like getting to a place where you can understand them and they can understand you, and maybe relating things that they can understand in their own contexts. So yeah, I would say that.
I really do agree with you both. It's really hard. It's really hard, and it's hard to get used to it if it doesn't. I mean, if our loved ones won't support us with our endeavors concerning activism or being worried about climate change and eco crisis in general. And like Pim said, I think it's really really important to really understand that we're all in these different phases of realizing how dire this situation is. And for some people, it's really hard to face this truth. And we have all different means to cope with this crisis and cultivating empathy and also finding peer support, finding support from somewhere else is really important.
Well, thank you all for highlighting that this is a very, very complicated problem, and it's difficult to navigate. But yeah, like Juni says, it's very important to also find peer support and find someone that can support you in this endeavor. So we have time for one more question. Um, and that is, how can you be so brave even though people talk badly about activists all the time? So this is a question about because we all know in the media and social media, it can be portrayed a bit like uh, environmental activists are being talked down at. So how do you navigate this, and how can you be so brave in this?
I mean, something that I think I just carry throughout my life, not necessarily just in activism, but I'm like, let the haters hate, like just let them. Because they're going to anyway, so it doesn't really like whether you address it or not. But I think I've been super fortunate, and I guess in my work I haven't really been met with much resistance. So if I were to, I don't know, maybe my mindset would change. But currently it's like just let them.
Thank you,
Um,
Natalie. And I'm happy you haven't been met with so much opposition yet. That's very good to hear. What about you, Pim?
I think similarly, there is a point where you come to where you're like, I'm just not. I think, like I mentioned it earlier, there's some people you just can't change, um, because that's what society has kind of like built their knowledge upon. So, like, if I ever hear any climate denialist or whatever, I almost immediately switch off because I'm like, I don't have the energy or the time to try and convince you when you're already convinced by another thing. Like, I'm not like that's that's where my energy doesn't lie. If that's someone else's thing, then go for it. But I think with the label of like activist sometimes being in a negative light, I actually I don't get too affected by that because although I dabble in like a lot of different kinds of activism, um, it's kind of grounded in that understanding that everything that every single person does matters. And every single role in activism matters. So even if someone is criticizing someone doing quite an extreme action, um, I'm happy to kind of just be like, well, that's what they choose to do. And I personally like I'm not going to place my opinion on that. And kind of understanding how if you want to look into it more, I would recommend looking into the Overton window. It's kind of a political understanding of how we can create kind of these shifts in political norms, I guess. I won't explain it now because I think it'll go over time, but I definitely recommend looking into that, and that will help you understand that like everyone's role has something contributing. So no matter what anyone says, like Natalie said, like let the haters hate because I'm not energetically interacting with them. So as long as I'm not, it's fine. Um, but yeah, luckily I haven't had too many confrontational things just because I'd rather sometimes protect my own heart. Because sometimes some people are not completely uh worth trying to change. Um, sorry, I don't mean it in not worth trying to change, but as in like sometimes it's very changed to change someone's ideology in like a 30-minute conversation. Because you can't change the world in 30 minutes anyway. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, and I would also like to add we have some Finnish climate activists who have said that if someone doesn't get angry, it doesn't work. So it's kind of this friction, like this resistance towards activists, is kind of this friction that comes from change. And yeah, it's like I try to think that resistance towards activists means that we're doing something right, and these old habits and structures are shaking.
So thank you, Juni, and thank you, Natalie and Pim. I think you brought some really, really important points up. That we sometimes just have to focus on the work we are doing and just accepting that there will be friction, but focusing most of all upon our own work and our own goals. So I think that is a very good note to leave on. Unfortunately, I think this conversation has been amazing. And it's been so, so interesting to hear both Pim and Natalie, and also you, Juni, your perspectives on this whole topic. So I want to really thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your very, very valuable insights. It's been a pleasure. All our speakers' social media are linked in YouTube description below, so you can keep following their work there and see what they are up to. We have also linked our YE social media, so you can keep up to this project that we are currently doing on eco-anxiety and also on lots of other work that we are doing. So please follow this. I also just want to mention that this is our second webinar in this series on eco-emotions. So if you did not have the chance to see the first one, that was covering the basics of eco-emotions, eco-anxiety, and how it affects young people. You can also find it on our YouTube channel and rewatch it there. And with that, I just want to thank you all once more for joining us today. It's been a pleasure from our side. And thank you for the really interesting conversation. And I just wish you a lovely evening and goodbye for now.
Thank you, everyone.